Whittingham was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2020 at the age of 46. She is a physician, a mother, a wife, a lifelong athlete, and an Air Force veteran. After a bumpy first year, she enrolled in research study and ended up on a wild trajectory. In the past year, she has finished the Ironman World Championship, St. Jude Marathon, the Boston Marathon, and a half Ironman, and competed in the Paralympic track and field trials. Her story has been shared on the Today Show, the Ironman documentary, USA Today, and Women's Health magazine. She is also a passionate advocate for the veterans of all ages with Parkinson's disease, helping to ensure they are able to get the benefits and care they deserve. It's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Whittingham.
So I'm Sarah Whittingham, and it's an honor for me to be here today to share my story since my diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. I'd like to start by thanking Cone Health and Dr. Tad and her team for putting this on. Listening to Dr. Tad's talk made me appreciate and realize you guys are so lucky to have a physician who exercises herself and pushes that. I haven't talked to Dr. Tad about this, but I was actually in Philadelphia last week as well, and I spoke to a group of VA neurologists about exercise and my journey and how important it's been to me. And as I'm looking at this group of neurologists, I realized that most of them probably don't exercise at all, and I'm never going to get them to encourage their patients to exercise if they don't start exercising. And so I was thinking afterwards, my talk was on the wrong focus, that I should have tried to get them exercising first. That way they could see how great it is and they would encourage their patients. So you're super fortunate to have a physician who is a huge exercise advocate and promotes that, because most people do not. So like the introduction said, I was diagnosed in 2020, 4 years ago. The first year after my diagnosis, I really struggled. I kind of went through the stages of grief. I suffered from anxiety and depression. I gained 30 pounds, and I just kind of was not in a good place. I was super fortunate to be enrolled in a research study at Cleveland Clinic that was studying the effects of cycling on the management and progression of Parkinson's disease. And as part of that study, I was randomized to a group that was given a Peloton exercise bike for a year and got weekly phone calls from a physical therapist encouraging me to ride it more, harassing me if I wasn't, and congratulating me as I made progress. And about 2 months into that study, I realized that the more that I rode the bike, the better I felt. And so I started to ride it more and more, and I started to feel better. In January of 2022, so this is about a year and a half-ish after my diagnosis, I had started this exercise study. I was, feeling a little bit better, but I still felt like I was on a kind of a downward trajectory. And so I took some time to make some goals. At this point, my husband is also a triathlete. I had been a triathlete prior, but had given it up because I'd gotten slower and didn't know why. But my husband is also a triathlete, and he had signed up to do a half Ironman triathlon in July, which at this point was about 6 months away. He'd already been training for it for about 4 months. And I kind of had the idea, I've been cycling, I'm up to being able to ride the bike for an hour. I could probably do a half Ironman, which is a 1.2 mile swim, a 56 mile bike, followed by a half marathon. And so I secretly signed up for the race and I started training. And I didn't tell anybody because it seemed like such a wild, far-fetched idea that I was afraid if anybody doubted me that I might start doubting myself. I get emotional. So the first time as I started training, my goal at first was just to get across the finish line alive. But as I started training, I began to feel better and better, and I realized, hey, I might be able to have a good race. I might be able to qualify for the half Ironman World Championships. Well, the day of the race came, and sorry, I messed up. We'll get to that later. So the day of the race came, and everything went way better than expected. I qualified for the half Ironman World Championships, and more importantly, I beat my husband by quite a lot. Later that year, I did the half Ironman World Championships with triathletes from around the world, and even though I didn't place very high, it was just an honor to be there and be able to compete with them. The Super Bowl of triathlon is the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii, Ironman Kona. And it's very, very difficult to get a spot. And every year they make a documentary about the race. And I've been watching it every year for years. In 2022, I was watching the documentary, which aired by December 2022. And each year they tell the story of an inspiring person who's there doing the race. And in 2022, they shared the story of Chris Nikic. And Chris Nikic is the first person with Down syndrome to finish an Ironman. And I saw how his story had inspired other people with Down syndrome to realize that they could do so much more. And that how with all the challenges that he had, he was able to do this. So there's no reason why I couldn't do that as well. And so I wrote Ironman and I told them my story. And I sent that off and I didn't hear anything back. I continued to exercise. I did another half Ironman in May and continued to run. I had a really bad cold through most of July, so I wasn't really able to do a whole lot of exercise. And I just started training for the Columbus Marathon, which is in October, when I got a phone call from Ironman telling me that they had a spot for me if I wanted to compete in Ironman in October. Well, this was 9 weeks away, and 9 weeks is not enough time to train for an Ironman, but I realized this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and I might as well give it a try. So I said yes, and I got to work training. I shared the exciting news with my movement disorder specialist and also Dr. Alberts, the researcher behind the Peloton study, and told them that I would be sharing my story at Ironman, and if they wanted to share it within their local community as well to help educate and inspire people, that they were welcome to do that. And so I had a good conversation with somebody from the Cleveland Clinic communications team, and she was moved after hearing my story and asked if she could share it with her friends on the Today Show. And I kind of chuckled. I said, yeah, but I'm really not that interesting. I just kind of do my thing. But turns out they ended up picking up the story. They sent a film crew to Cleveland to film my life for 2 days. And then I got to go to New York and sit down with Hoda and Jenna and share my story there, which was an incredible experience and something that introverted me. I'm also an introvert. I never thought that I would be able to do. So the Ironman was in October last year, so about a year ago. It was October 14th, so we're getting close to the year point. I got to Ironman, and the communications team wanted to meet with me, and I told them my story, and they had tears in their eyes. And they asked if they could use me as their inspirational athlete for that year's documentary. And so this meant that there were cameras on me most of the day. There was a drone flying next to me for part of the bike, motorcycles on my face. At one point in the run, there was a guy in a Segway with a camera next to me filming. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. So the race went well. I got through the swim okay, and then I got to the bike. It's 112 miles on the bike, so it's twice what I mentioned before. So it's a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and then a marathon. And so the swim went well. It was in the ocean in Hawaii. It was beautiful. I saw the fish. Everything was beautiful. I got on the bike, and it was hot and windy. And I was doing okay until I got to about the 80-mile point. So at this point, I have at least 2 more hours, probably more like 2.5 hours left on the bike. And I noticed my cadence had started to get slower. My heart rate was up, and I felt really hot. And so I pulled into one of the aid stations, which they had about every 10 miles. And the volunteers there were nice enough to pack my jersey with ice. They helped me open the vial for my medications because I was kind of a mess and couldn't even open the vial for my medications to take another Cinemet. And asked if I needed any medical attention. I said, no, I think I'm okay. I just need to kind of cool off a little bit, get my heart rate down, and give my medicine a little time to work. And then when I was ready to get back on the bike, they asked if it would be okay if they said a prayer for me, and I went on my way. So I got through the bike. When I got off the bike, I'd been on the bike for close to 8 hours by this point. I felt like I was hunched over, I was super stiff, and it was really hard to even walk. So I spent some time in the tent, the changing tent, and used my massage gun to try to loosen up and kept going. When I got about halfway into the run, I usually listen to music when I exercise to help keep my brain active and moving, and they don't allow music at Ironman for safety reasons. And so I got about halfway through the run, so I'd probably been going for about 12 hours at this point, and I noticed that I was kind of slowing down. I probably wasn't really walking in a straight line, and I was just kind of out of it. And so as people would pass me, I'd start talking to them and see if anybody wanted to keep talking. And eventually this woman passed me, and we started talking, and it turns out she's an OBGYN doctor from Australia. And so for the next 2 hours, I learned all about the Australian healthcare system and how women deliver babies in Australia, and how they don't really use anesthesiologists as much because apparently Australians are much tougher than us. They don't really do all that nonsense. So anyways, I learned all about that during the race too, which was interesting. And then when I got to mile 25 of the run, I'll share the video because it kind of otherwise I'll be repeating itself. I hope you can see this and make sure the audio works. Mile 25 of the run. Can you hear that? So Chris, I got to mile 25 of the run, and there on the corner is Chris Nikich and his dad. And I say, you're a huge part of the reason that I'm here, is because I saw your story last year. And he grabbed my hand and you just held it so tight and said, come on, you're okay, you go.
Nothing, not even a Parkinson's disease diagnosis, can stop Sarah Whittingham in her mission to show what is possible with self-belief and an iron will.
All the way to the finish line right there.
Even when I'm speaking by myself, I get emotional when I watch that. It was such an incredible experience. So that's my story, and I'm completely extreme and I don't expect anybody to go out and sign up for an Ironman. But as a physician, when I went to medical school 20 years ago, I thought of Parkinson's as being the hunched over old man who would be slowly getting worse and worse over the course of 10 years. And it wasn't until I met other people with Parkinson's who've been living with this disease a lot longer than I have that began to change. And so that's why it's super important for events like this to bring people together and meet people who've been at this for much longer than me and learn from them and just see how well they're doing. And the ones who are exercising and have a positive attitude will blow you away. So I was in Philadelphia, like I said, I was in Philadelphia for the Movement Disorder Society. I was just speaking to the VA neurologist. But one of my favorite underdog movies is Rocky. And with our journey with Parkinson's, I think of ourselves as Rocky. We're unlikely opponents against an undefeated adversary. And we may fall, we may get bruised up, but we'll need our care partners and team to help pick us up, bandage us up, and put us back out there in the ring. And that with persistence and a good attitude, we may not win in the end, but we'll be able to go the distance with our heads held high. So Dr. Tat kind of already went through a lot of the research on all of this, but there is a lot of research showing that exercise is the only thing that we know of that can actually slow the progression of the disease. And there was an interesting study out of Yale that came out recently showing that in some cases it may help reverse the progression of the disease. It's not going to bring back cells that have already died, but it may help make cells that are not dead yet healthier and help. So exercise helps all of our symptoms. And I really, I expected it to just maybe help my motor symptoms, but it helps my anxiety and my constipation, and I sleep better. It helps everything for me and most people I've met with Parkinson's. If there were a medication that would do all this that also had the side effect of making us look better in a swimsuit, we would all be fighting our insurance companies for this medication. And yet we as Americans, even those without Parkinson's, struggle to maintain an exercise program. And with Parkinson's, it's even more difficult, but even more important. And so it's important that we find a way to not make excuses and get to work and not feel sorry for ourselves. I like this handout from the National Parkinson's Foundation about exercise. So with exercise, it's important to do a variety of different activities. Don't just focus on one thing. And they recommend 4 different categories, doing something from each of the 4 different categories. So some sort of aerobic activity, some biking, cycling, something that's going to get your heart rate up, some sort of strength training, some sort of balance and agility training, and then some sort of stretching like yoga or something else. So doing a lot of different things is important. It helps prevent us from getting injured. It helps us manage all of our symptoms, and it helps keep it interesting so that you're not always doing the same thing all the time. There's a lot of different things that we can do for exercising, and I'm sure you could think of 10 more than this, but The important thing is you find something that you enjoy doing and that's fun. Because if it's not fun, you're not going to keep doing it, and that's pointless. So even if you're out walking, you're doing walking versus running, just getting out the door and doing something is important. So as I mentioned, when I was first diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, this is what I imagined for my future. That over the next, I pictured myself in 10 years going through these stages and being in a wheelchair in 10 years. And it wasn't until I met another physician who had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease that this began to change. And so I thought about how I think, instead of a steady downward trajectory, I've kind of made up what I think the progression of Parkinson's disease looks like from my experience. And so we had a baseline before our Parkinson's disease even starts progressing, probably about 10, 15 years before our diagnosis. We may be on a steady downward trajectory if we're not exercising or doing much of anything. And then at some point, this is the time zero Dr. Tad talked about, we get diagnosed. And our doctor may start us on medication and encourage us to exercise. And I feel like I kind of went through a honeymoon phase there because I felt better than I had in years. I now knew why all these weird things were happening. I had medications that made me feel better. When I could run again and not be super stiff for 3 days afterwards, and it was kind of a honeymoon period for me. And so you feel better for a while. And we may have some setbacks, you may get sick, the disease will continue to progress slowly, but over time, with your ups and downs, there still may be a downward trajectory, but with exercise, we can help flatten that out and slow that down. Dr. Ted also mentioned the UPDRS motor scale scores, and this is kind of a complicated slide, but the point is that in December, zero is less motor symptoms, and then it gets higher with the more motor symptoms you have. So the point of this slide is that when I was diagnosed in December 2020, my movement disorder specialist gave me a UPDRS scale of 16. And over the last 4 years, I actually just saw him yesterday, and it was a 12. But in any event, my motor symptoms are better controlled now than they were 4 years ago when I was diagnosed. And yes, I take medications that help make that possible. But I'm doing better now than I was 4 years ago, and that's all. I firmly believe it's because of how much I exercise and stay active. And so I propose a change to the previous slide with the guy in the wheelchair to something like this. So before we're diagnosed, we may not be exercising, we're living our lives, we're just doing our thing, we're maybe a little bit overweight. And then at some point we get diagnosed, and we start to exercise. And we set some goals, and we achieve those, and then we set bigger goals, and we achieve those. And over time, we can get in the best shape of our lives. Even if you're 70 or 80 years old, you can still get in amazing shape with hard work. This is me at Half Ironman in 2022. And as we get older, we may slow down, we may not be able to do quite as many things, but we're still out there exercising and having fun. And at some point, we may need to stop running and switch to walking, or switch from walking to some sort of chair exercise or things like that, but we stay active, and as active as we can. So the next part of my talk has to do with how to do all of this, because we all know we need to exercise, but so does every American know that they need to exercise, and yet we have a huge obesity problem because people don't like to exercise. But it's critical for us to exercise. It's our job. Most of you have had a job where you had to get up and go to work, put on your shoes and go to work every day. Well, exercise is our new job. 6 days a week, you should be out there doing something. Even if you start out, you're putting on your shoes and you're walking out your door and you say, today I'm going to walk to the mailbox and back, that's your job for that day. And some days it's going to be harder, and people are all starting at different spots, but the act of getting up and going and doing something, it's getting up and driving to the gym and doing just a little bit, but just getting there, and you'll meet other people who are exercising and build a social network. So I'm going to share some of these tools, and they're tools that I've learned from various roles in my life. I'll be sharing tools that I learned in my role as a Parkinson's patient, in my role as a mother, these are my 2 daughters, in my role as a physician, in my role as an endurance athlete, in my role as a veteran and as a member of the Air Force. So I'm going to start with things I've learned from other people with Parkinson's. And the most important thing I've learned is the importance of gratitude. This is my favorite Michael J. Fox quote, and that gratitude makes optimism sustainable. There's always something to be grateful for. No matter how bad things get, you can always think of something. Whether it's not, you live in a free country, that you have chocolate milk in your refrigerator, that you have a dog that loves you no matter what, you can always think of something, no matter what. And so each day I found it helpful to write something down that I'm grateful for. And if I start to have a negative thought, I'll say, no, but it's a good day. My dog still loves me, or things like that. So there's always something to be grateful for. And focus your attention and energy on all that you do have, and not all of the things that are not going quite right. The other thing I think is important is to think of yourself as the superhero of your story. If somebody were to write a book about you, would they think that it was kind of boring and everybody would fall asleep, or would it be something that was interesting? And so when it's time to get up and decide to exercise, think of what would you want your hero to do? Would you want them to go back to bed or sit on the couch, or would you want them to fight? And Parkinson's is in a way a blessing. It gives us something to overcome, and it gives you the chance to become a hero to others. Because think about it, you have Parkinson's, and if, say, somebody without Parkinson's sees you out at a 5K, they're like, oh my gosh, he's out there doing a 5K, he's got Parkinson's, what's my excuse? So this gives each of you an opportunity to be a hero to other people. And it's, there are blessings to it. And so, look at yourself as that superhero when you look in the mirror. Look at the wisdom in your eyes, and if, find a way to laugh at the things that are kind of funny. Like if you don't have to really work too hard to brush your teeth because your hand's shaking so much already, laugh about that. Find the funny in it, and laugh and appreciate that. The next lesson I learned from my role as a parent. So about 10 years ago, we still lived in Utah before we moved to Ohio. And I had two teenage stepchildren at the time who were reluctantly moved from California to live with their dad and us in Utah. And we also had two toddlers in the house, and nobody was happy. And so on one of my Air Force Reserve weekends, I was talking to the social worker for our unit about this. And his civilian job was working in a center for troubled teens, and he recommended this series of books to me, which I got because we were kind of at our wits' end. But the premise of the book seemed completely backwards to my husband and I, who both spent years in the military, where bad behavior is immediately corrected. The premise of the book was to ignore the bad behavior and focus on catching your children being good, and focus on the good behaviors. And so we tried it, kind of thinking, okay, well, nothing else is working, let's give this a try. And I was shocked at how quickly it worked, that by ignoring the things that we didn't like, and just, even if it was making my blood pressure go crazy, just ignore that, and then when catch your children being good. And sometimes it required some creativity, like, oh good, you got out of bed today, or something, something as basic as, and focus on something positive, no matter how creative you had to be. And over time, it got easier and easier to find things that were positive, and took so much less energy, and was so much more fun than constantly being the evil stepmother. And so I feel that with Parkinson's, if we can find a way to ignore the negative and make it irrelevant so it doesn't matter because it's pointless, there's nothing you can do about it, you might as well focus all your energy on the good and make that important. And so as you find things that you like to do to exercise, it's important to think about the things that you like about those exercises. I have a good friend from the Air Force Academy who is a serious CrossFit coach. She competes in the world. She's super hardcore. But anyways, a few years ago, she asked if she could use me as a guinea pig for some training she was doing to coach people to be mentally tough. And I thought, well, I'm pretty mentally tough already, but sure, I'll see what she can do. And so she had me do this training, and one of the tools that she had me do was to take all of the exercises that I do and write down everything that I can think of that I like about that activity, no matter how trivial or how small. And so I still do this on my phone. I have a running list. So for example, swimming. It's really hard to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go get in a cold pool to swim. But instead of having that thought, I think about, oh, it's going to feel really good to get in a warm shower afterwards. Or when I get in the pool, I like to feel how when the water goes under my swim cap, it's kind of refreshing. And thinking about all of the positive things, no matter how trivial or how silly simple they are, helps keep your mind in a positive place. And because once you start thinking negative thoughts, it's so easy to say, oh, never mind, I'll just go back to bed. Or you'll come up with some reason. But if you can find something positive to tie that to, that you can focus on. So if you're going for a walk, think about, oh, I like smelling the air when I'm outside, or listening to the birds chirp, or seeing my neighbor and waving hello. Like, think of all the positive things that are happening along that walk, other than maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable, because thinking about that doesn't really help anybody. the next tool I'm going to talk about, I learned in my years as an endurance athlete. When we lived in Utah, we lived at the top of a really big hill. So this meant anytime I went out for a walk or a run, I would have to finish that by going up this big hill at the end. And I would either have to walk my bike up the hill, or I would go from a run to a walk, and I would feel tired and awful. And so after a period of time, and I've gotten harder and harder to exercise, I said, well, I wonder what happened if I drove to the bottom of the hill and started my run at the bottom of the hill. So I'm still running the same loop, but instead of finishing going up this hill feeling terrible, I'm finishing where the last mile is a gradual downhill, and I feel strong and fast and happy. And so I didn't realize at the time until I read later I came across this peak end rule, which is something they've studied in psychology, where what we remember about an experience is almost entirely based upon how that experience ends. And if there's a peak event or a component of that experience, that as well. And so, interestingly, some of the research was done on this with people getting colonoscopies with minimal to no sedation. And I don't know how they found people to sign up for that. But another example would be like if you're watching your favorite football team and they're winning the entire game and you're having a super fun afternoon and then they blow it at the end and they lose. The next day when you look back on watching the football game, you're like, man, that was a terrible game, even though you had fun for 3 hours. Or flip that around and your team's losing the entire game and you're mad at the TV and you're red in the face and you're throwing things and why can't they get it right, and then they come back and win. The next day you'll be telling your friends, wow, well, that was such a great game. I had so much fun watching football. Even though you were angry for 3 hours, you really only had fun for 10 minutes. So to translate this to exercise, even though it's hard, when I think of Ironman, like there was a lot of suffering and discomfort. But when I look back on that experience, what I remember most is that finish. And so every day when you exercise, find a way to end on a positive note. Whether it's, I enjoy the hot shower after the swim, or going out for coffee with some friends, or find something that's positive to tie to the end of the experience. So that when you look back on it the next day, you're like, okay, that was fun, let's do that again, even though you may not have been having fun the entire time. So I found that to be another helpful tool that's helped me as well. Are we doing on time? Good. Okay. Sorry, I talk fast, so I maybe. So the next tool I'll talk about, I learned in my years in the Air Force. So I spent 20 years in the Air Force. I went to the Air Force Academy. I was a maintenance officer for a couple years before medical school. I went to Tulane in New Orleans for medical school, and then I was an aircraft maintenance officer I was that before medical school. I was a flight surgeon for a few years, so flight doc for pilots. And then I went on to do an anesthesia residency. And as an anesthesiologist, I deployed to Bagram in Afghanistan for 6 months, taking care of American casualties as well as local nationals. So that's the big part of who I've been. So a few pictures here. This top left one is me in basic training with my roommate. You can see I'm rocking the BCGs, or birth control glasses. They're very effective. And then this picture is me and my friend Rita. We are still in contact, getting ready to board the jump plane. And then my friend Jenna and Sierra, who came to cheer me on at Ironman. So my lesson here is that suffering with friends is more fun. When I was at the Air Force Academy, if you heard one of your classmates was getting yelled at out in the hallway, the expectation is that you would stop whatever it was you were doing and go stand at their side and get yelled at with them. And if they had to do push-ups, that you would get down and do push-ups too. And so later in the day, we would all get together and laugh about how ridiculous all that was, and it made it fun instead of something that could look back as being a miserable experience. So find your people and work together, because going through something hard that's difficult is so much easier when you have people who are also going through the same thing or who are going through it with you. Jenna, this woman, Jenna on the right, she was on the track team with me at the Air Force Academy. She was a hurdler and a long jumper. She's also a physician, and she was deployed to Afghanistan at the same time that I was, but at a different base. And I found out about a year after my diagnosis that she had also been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease the same month that I had been. And so she is part of my support structure. We're going through the same thing. And she's the one helping me advocate for our veterans with Parkinson's, our young veterans, especially with Parkinson's disease. Because even though we've done all of these things, I worked as a maintenance officer, served on 7 bases with contaminated water, and served near burn pits, I don't qualify for VA disability benefits. And if I don't, there's a lot of others. And so Jenna and I have been working hard to advocate for veterans. I found through a Freedom of Information Act, there's over 5,000 post 9/11 veterans who've applied for VA disability for Parkinson's. And most have been denied. And so I'm really working hard. This is why I was in Philadelphia to speak with our VA neurologists to raise attention to this, because the system needs to change because the policy isn't matching the science. And many of these veterans won't be able to work till age 65, and they're going to need help. So another thing I'm very passionate about, and I'm very fortunate to have Jenna help me. Along the lines of suffering with friends, and this wasn't really suffering, but this is a photo from the Boston Marathon in April. And this is probably, somebody asked me recently, what was the most meaningful thing that's happened since my diagnosis? And I have to say that meeting this group of people has made a huge impact on me. All 6 of us in this picture have Parkinson's disease, and all 6 of us finished the Boston Marathon last April. It was the first year that they had a coordination impaired division. The Boston Athletic Association treated us like VIPs. They put us on the special bus up to the starting line. We had our own private tent with nice snacks laid out. There was no line for the porta potties. I actually took a picture of that because that never happens at a major race. But they treated us like VIPs. But meeting these people helped put things in perspective. Because going into last year, I was thinking, wow, this is my last hurrah. I still feel great. I need to get this all done. Kind of like not really my bucket list, but this is what I need to get done. But then meeting these people, I realized, whoa, I need to keep at this. Because Rhonda Fouts, who's this woman on the left, is the most amazing, inspiring person I've ever met. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 1999 at the age of 37. She tells this story, this incredible story, but the first 10 years she basically went home and waited to die. She gained 100 pounds, she was in a wheelchair, and her neurologist thought maybe a DBS will help her, which at the time, in her 40s, it was very young for somebody to receive a DBS, and kind of, she was one of the first younger people to get a DBS. Well, she started to feel better after her DBS. She started walking with 5Ks with her son, started to lose the weight, eventually started running. And now, 25 years later, 15 years after her DBS, she's run over 100 marathons, including Boston Marathon 12 times, and she's still going. So meeting somebody like her, when days are hard, I was like, okay, this is not the end for me. I need to keep going because I need to be like Rhonda and still be doing this 20 years from now. And I hope that I can find a way to do that. Another good story from this group is Joe Drake, who's in the orange shirt here and the pink socks. Joe's in his middle 60s. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 5 years ago. He'd run a marathon years earlier when he was young. He's an MIT-trained engineer, and so he approached his diagnosis like an engineer in a very systematic way. And he has also run dozens of marathons. He ran all 6 of the marathon majors over the course of 1 year. So that's the Boston Marathon, New York, Chicago, Berlin, London, and Tokyo, all in 1 year. And then he did that, and then he did it again, but it didn't all happen to be in the same year the second time that he did it. And so meeting people like this who have the common thread here was that they all have a positive attitude and they all have an amazing sense of humor and are able to laugh at themselves. So kind of where do we start with this? And I think the most important thing is to learn to set goals. I mean, a lot of people set the goal of, I'm going to start exercising more, I need to exercise more. Well, that's a terrible goal because you have no idea when you've accomplished that, and you can't celebrate that you've accomplished that. So when you set a goal, set a specific goal, and you have to start by figuring out what you can do now. So if all you can do now is walk to the mailbox and back, make it your goal to every day for the next 6 days, walk to the mailbox and back, and then if you still feel okay, walk to the mailbox and back again. And set the goal of, okay, a month from now, I hope to be able to walk to the end of the block, and write it down. And never stop making bigger and bigger goals. And I think some people make this mistake of getting to an exercise program and just trying to maintain that. But I think it's important to keep trying to improve no matter what. And it's going to get more and more challenging, but continue to set goals. And by setting goals, you're constantly thinking of a future where you are in a good spot. I mean, I feel like, by setting goals, you're thinking of your future where I am able to run that 5K, or I am able to walk a 10K, and you're thinking of your future in that way. The next thing I'm going to talk about is humor. And so like I mentioned before, I think it's really important to find humor in what we do. And so this is a video from the Paralympic track trials, which were in Florida in July. I had never been a sprinter, but the only events that they had for my disability were the 100-meter and 200-meter dash. And so I never run these races in my life. I was a miler and 2-miler in college. Never used starting blocks. I had my daughter's track coach. Had me out on the track, tried to teach me how to use blocks, so I didn't look like a totally ridiculous. But there was only one other person in my race. She's a 24-year-old Jordan McGuire. She has mild cerebral palsy and had been racing since high school. And so we're doing this 200-meter dash, which was on Peacock, so I don't know if anybody even watched it, but this is me running the 200, or the highlights from it. Let's see here. Did it go? Oh, maybe I do this. Whoops, hold on. Get the video to work. I don't know why the video's not working. Well, I'll have to show it to you later. But anyways, I fall on my face 10 yards before the finish line. And then they show the replay in slow motion, so if we can figure out how to do it. But anyway, and then they said, I'll try to figure out how to make that work later. But it's on my website, which I'll get you later, so the point is, I realized with this, that, I told my husband the day wasn't a total failure, because if my goal was to raise awareness about the challenges of exercise and being able to laugh at ourselves, I fully accomplished that, because way more people have seen this video than when I've looked at it have had it just across the finish line, because they, like the humor of me falling on my face. I don't know why that's not working, but it's okay. Oh wait, maybe. Oh, well. Okay. All right, so the last thing I'm going to talk about are things that I've learned in my role as a physician. And I work as an anesthesiologist, and so I take care of people coming in for one of the scarier things that they have to do. And I see people coming in with all different types of attitudes about how the day's going to go. I see people coming in who are very appreciative of the care that they're giving, they're grateful, and they have a positive attitude about how everything's going to go. And I see people who are kind of just go with the flow. Here I am, just do what you got to do, let's get it over with. And then there are people who come in who have the attitude that nothing ever goes right for me, nobody knows what they're doing, and you guys the day's going to go awful. And I found over time, I've noticed that for the most part, the day turns out exactly how they think it's going to turn out. And so I got to wondering if people who have a positive attitude have better surgical outcomes than those who don't. And I looked up, I didn't really find any research studies about that. But there are a lot of people who studied long-term outcomes in people with cancer, strokes, chronic pain, and across the board they found that people who think positively about their future have lower cortisol levels, lower inflammatory markers, and when you look at how they're doing over the long term and adjust it for what their prognosis was, across the board they're all doing better physically and mentally down the road than those who think negatively. And so again, I think this is why it's important to set, another reason it's important to set goals, because when you set goals, you look at a future where you are accomplishing that goal. You're not looking, nobody's going to set the goal that I hope to be in a wheelchair in 10 years. You're setting a goal that I want to be able to walk my daughter down the aisle in 5 years, or I want to do this. And so it's important to write these goals down and do your best to accomplish those. So where do I start? I kind of mentioned this before. This is my daughter in an indoor track meet. She looks thrilled. She's like number 6 there in the middle, looking unamused. But where do I start? And so I think there's a lot of things you can do to start. But I think the most important is to just get out the door and do something, and find things that you like to do, and just stick with it. So there are days going to be hard where you do put on your shoes and go out to exercise and you don't really feel like doing anything. But appreciate the fact and celebrate the fact that you got out the door and you tried. And it's important, it's your new job. We've all had jobs where you had to get up in the morning and get dressed and go to work. Well, now your job is to get up in the morning, get dressed, and go to the gym. And you may not do a whole lot when you get there. Maybe you'll just talk to people, but maybe you'll be motivated to do a little bit. Maybe you'll see an exercise class that looks interesting and go with that. And I often get asked, what can my care partner do to help me? And I tell people, we all benefit from exercise. It's not just you with Parkinson's. Encourage your care partner, your spouse, whoever's helping you to go with you, because it's going to help them too. And it's important that they take care of themselves as well. So, an important part too is to find your friends that you can do these things with. About a year after my diagnosis, a friend recommended this book called Younger Next Year. And for me, it was a total game changer. And it's written several years ago, so a little bit about it is dated about, go buy a heart rate monitor with your strap around it. But otherwise, I think all of it is incredibly, incredibly relevant. And even though it was not written with people with Parkinson's in mind, all of it is very, very applicable to us. And I say with an exclamation point. It's very humorous, it's very well written, and if you will feel motivated to exercise by the time you're done reading this book, because it gives you some tips and tools from people who have never been athletes in their lives, and shows what's possible and how important it can be to continue to exercise. So I like to listen to books when I'm in the car, so I've listened to both of these on Audible. The women's one's very similar to the men's. It just talks about a little bit nuances that are different for women. One thing I thought was interesting that, when women they get older, they gain more confidence and speak more about things, whereas men, tend to maybe not quite feel as confident about things as they get older. So there are some things on there that I thought were interesting, and these have been worth my while, and I've read them several times because I did a book club that I think really made a big difference for people as well about these. So and I don't get anything from the publisher or anything. I just think they're super helpful. So for me, what's been most helpful, like I said, is connecting with other people with Parkinson's disease. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's an amazing Facebook group called the Parkinson's Fight Club, which is a group of people with Parkinson's who are, of all ages and abilities, but encouraging each other to do athletic things and sharing all the things that we do athletically. And we also share tips and tools about, how to manage various symptoms. Like one of my favorites is, facial masking. A lot of us, will have a masked face. And people post their things that have helped them on these websites. And like one of my favorites is a guy who says when he brushes his teeth, he tries to make as many funny faces as he can over 30 seconds while he's brushing his teeth. Or the grandmother who, anytime her granddaughter comes over, they have funny face contests, and she tries to think of what she can do to make her face, and things like that say that they help each other. So, I've kind of tried those, and they seem to help. But there's so many things that other people have learned along the way, people who've been living with this every day for years and years that you may not have time to discuss with your doctor, and your doctor may not, because they may not be focusing on those things. But there's so many tips and tools on these sites that are helpful. And I've worked with the administrator of that group to try to help combine a lot of that knowledge and information and inspiration onto a website. To help inspire and educate people. So sharing stories of what other people are doing from around the world to help manage their symptoms and educate and learn from each other. I'm also hoping to get an event calendar where people could share like maybe a 5K they're doing locally with other people and try to get other people with Parkinson's there to join them. So I actually have somebody working on the site now to completely revamp it to try to make it more user-friendly. So it's online now, but it'll be better in 2 weeks if you want to look at it again then. So I guess that's the end, but thank you so much for your talk, and thanks again to Cone Health for allowing me to be here and share my story. Thank you. Do you have questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you to Sarah. Thank you for sharing your story. Translating despair into hope. It's a beautiful